The morning mist rolled softly over the hills of Alderwick, a small village tucked away between the folds of the English countryside. It was the kind of place you could pass through in 10 minutes if you didn't stop to look, but if you did, you might never want to leave. The smell of damp grass, the quiet bleating of sheep, and the faraway sound of a tractor breaking the stillness made it feel like time had forgotten this place. The cobblestone lanes were lined with cottages whose walls carried the marks of centuries, moss growing in the cracks, ivy crawling up the sides like old memories that refused to fade. Life in Alderwick moved with the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought lambs and daffodils, summer meant long days in the fields, autumn turned everything gold, and winter wrapped the village in silence. People lived simply, not poor, not rich, just enough. Most of them worked the land, grew what they could, and shared what they had. There was no rush, no noise, no flashing lights, only the steady heartbeat of a life that city people often dreamed about but rarely understood. Among the villagers was Eleanor Reed, a woman in her late 20s who had once called Alderwick home, but had left for London years ago. She'd gone chasing dreams like many young people did. Bright lights, big city, the promise of something more. But the city had taken more from her than it gave. It had drained her slowly, long hours, loud nights, and a loneliness that even crowds couldn't fill. When she got the call that her father had fallen ill, she packed her things in silence and took the first train back home. It was raining when she arrived. The same rain that once felt warm and familiar now felt cold and heavy. As the taxi climbed the winding lane to the old family farm, Eleanor pressed her forehead to the glass and watched the green fields roll by. The hedges were overgrown, the barns looked tired, and the roads were wet with memories. She wondered if anything had changed. Her father, Thomas Reed, had once been one of the proudest farmers in the county. He had worked the land with his bare hands, never once complaining, even when storms ruined crops or prices dropped. But now, the man who had carried so much strength looked frail. His skin had the pale softness of someone who had spent too much time in bed. His voice cracked when he said her name. "Ellie, you're home." She smiled, but her chest ached. "I am, Dad. I'm here." The house felt smaller than she remembered. The smell of wood smoke, the ticking of the old clock on the mantel, and the framed photos of her mother, gone 5 years now, all surrounded her like ghosts of another life. The farm, too, had changed. The once green pastures were patchy, the fences sagged, and the animals were fewer. Money was tight. Her father had done his best, but times had been cruel to small farmers. Big companies had bought up land, supermarkets had pushed prices down, and the younger generation had left for the cities. That night, as Eleanor stood outside looking at the stars, she heard the low hum of the wind moving across the hills. It sounded like the village was breathing, slowly, painfully. The lights in the cottages were few, most windows dark by 9. There was something both peaceful and sad about it. She remembered being a child, running down those same lanes with muddy shoes, laughing until her sides hurt. Back then, she thought Alderwick would never change. But everything does, eventually. Over the next few days, she tried to settle back in. The villagers were kind but cautious, treating her like someone half familiar. Old Mrs. Cartwright from the bakery waved each morning, and Mr. Hobbs, who ran the post office, offered her tea and questions about London. "Must have been grand, eh? Big city life," he said. Eleanor smiled politely but didn't answer. She didn't know how to explain that the city had been both everything and nothing. A place full of people but short on soul. She spent her mornings walking through the fields, feeling the damp soil under her boots, listening to the soft rustle of wind through the wheat. It was strange how something so ordinary could feel sacred when you'd been away too long. The fields were quiet, but they spoke, in ways the city never could. She could almost hear her mother's voice, gentle and patient, saying, "This land gives you what you give it, love. Treat it kindly." Her father's condition worsened for a while, and she found herself taking over small chores, feeding the animals, checking the fences, keeping the books. The work was hard, and the money didn't stretch far, but she found peace in the routine. Every evening, she sat by her father's bedside, telling him stories about her day, watching his tired eyes light up for a moment. He would nod slowly and say, "You always belonged here, Ellie. You just forgot for a while." One afternoon, Eleanor went into the village shop and overheard two farmers talking. Another one gone, one said. That's the fifth this year. No one can afford to keep going. Prices are down again. Eleanor felt a twist in her chest. The land was dying, and with it, the people who loved it. But she also felt something else. A quiet anger, the kind that makes you want to fight back. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, the screen glowing in the dark. She began researching sustainable farming, local co-ops, government grants, anything that could help small farms survive. She didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, she drove into the neighboring town to meet a man who ran a small agricultural collective. He told her how villages like Alderwick could pool their resources, sell directly to markets, and rely less on big corporations. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. When she returned, she gathered the villagers in the old church hall. The room smelled of old wood and tea. They looked at her with curiosity, some doubtful, some hopeful. "We can save Alderwick," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Not by going back, but by moving forward together. We can form a cooperative, share the work, the costs, the profits. We can make our own future." There was silence at first. Then someone said, "It'll never work." Another muttered, "We've tried before." But then, old Mr. Hobbs stood up. "Maybe it's time we try again," he said quietly, and slowly heads began to nod. Over the next few months, the village changed. Not overnight, but little by little. Fields once left empty were sown again. The dairy started selling local cheese to nearby cafes. The bakery began using village-grown wheat. Even the children started small vegetable gardens behind their homes. Eleanor worked day and night, coordinating deliveries, applying for grants, learning more about farming than she ever thought she would. Her father watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes proud and wet. "You've done what I couldn't," he whispered one evening. "You've brought them together." She smiled, kneeling beside him. "We did it, Dad. All of us." When spring came, Alderwick looked alive again. The hills glowed green under the sun, laughter echoed from the fields, and for the first time in years, the village pub was full on a Friday night. People talked, shared, planned. There was hope, not the loud kind, but the quiet, steady kind that grows like roots underground. Eleanor stood by the window that evening, watching the lanterns flicker across the lane. The sky was painted with the last light of day, soft and golden. She thought about the life she had left behind, the city, the noise, the loneliness, and felt no regret. Alderwick had given her something the city never could: a reason to stay, a purpose to wake up for. When her father passed away that summer, the whole village came to the funeral. They filled the little church with flowers from their gardens and stories from their hearts. Eleanor stood beside the grave, tears in her eyes but peace in her heart. She knew he'd left, knowing the land was in good hands. Years later, when people spoke of Alderwick, they spoke of how it came back from the brink. How one small village refused to die, because its people remembered who they were. They spoke of Eleanor Reed, the girl who went to the city and returned to light a fire in the hearts of her people. And on quiet evenings, when the wind swept across the fields and the stars blinked above the moors, it felt as if the land itself was whispering, not of endings, but of new beginnings. The morning mist rolled softly over the hills of Alderwick, a small village tucked away between the folds of the English countryside. It was the kind of place you could pass through in 10 minutes, if you didn't stop to look, but if you did, you might never want to leave. The smell of damp grass, the quiet bleating of sheep, and the faraway sound of a tractor breaking the stillness